Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 444 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 9 of Vampire Republic. And here we go. And that's how they visited a vampire's company's blood growth factory. For their own safety and for publicity, a news team accompanied Duncan and Vanessa as they toured it, with Edmund acting as guide. In many ways, it could have been anything. It could have been a facade, a fake factory making nothing while seeming to make blood. But Vanessa had an ace up her sleeve. She'd brought 2 experts, one a blood expert, one a biology expert. Both also had knowledge specifically of biomanufacturing. They went through a number of rooms. They all meant nothing to Duncan and Vanessa, but Vanessa's experts seemed quite interested and looked and listened very closely during Edmund's tour. They asked questions and for certain verifications, and Edmund seemingly gladly answered them and gave them free rein to examine the various machines, computers, and liquids. Everyone carried phones recording audio, video, or both. They didn't want Edmund or any other vampire to pull something using some sort of power, hypnosis, or simple tricks. In the end, both of Vanessa's experts agreed this was bioengineered blood, being made by specifically prepared bacteria, and by several important measures was identical to regular human blood. Life liquor could actually make it so vampires could live among humans. They then had Edmund drink some life liquor, the idea being that if it was all somehow a scam, the fluid would not actually be usable as vampire food. But he drank it, and they stayed with him nearly till sunup. They went their separate ways, got some sleep, and waited for the next day. The next day, there was a wave of interest about life liquor. It created another wave, and another, but not as big as the earlier ones about vampires existing at all. Both Duncan and Vanessa had several interviews about it, and then it just sort of vaporized. Where both of them had assumed there would be great argumentation and debate about what it all meant, instead the media found other things to talk about, and so did the podcast sphere. Though they still got some requests for interviews, it was increasingly smaller shows and podcasts with less and less reach. That wasn't all. Life liquor went on the market, but as the vampires were mostly wealthy and secretive, it was unclear how much was being sold. Most of it wasn't even sold through stores, but directly from the manufacturer, which had a website. Also, the company making life liquor was not publicly traded, which meant information on sales were nearly non-existent. There were some anti-vampire groups that had formed, and they did their best to figure out what was going on with life liquor. Duncan and Vanessa had been invited to several of them, but they declined all such offers. They weren't sure what they wanted to do in terms of anti-vampire action, if any, beyond their releasing the information into the world. But that was a mistake. Quietly, Life Liquor built up its operations. First, it built up the factory in the United States, the one Duncan and Vanessa had toured. But at this time, many vampires were old and wealthy. They had the means to expand the factories and make new ones, even if there was no profit in it. But there was profit. Because all the vampires immediately switched from human victims to life liquor, there was a lot of money spilling into their coffers. Vampires, now that they were known to the public, had found it increasingly risky to find blood. So, life liquor became their means of survival. But this change did something else. As life liquor became more and more easily available, vampires started to recruit more vampires. After all, the risks of hunting were gone, and there was no gain in trying to hide their vampirism, as vampires were now public knowledge. So now there was a real advantage in numbers. More and more vampires were made. Wealthy people especially were targets. Those who refused to fit the mold were killed, but a huge percent of wealthy people were already amoral, and so it was a positive boon to them to never age, never die, and have multiple special powers. This meant that, within a year of Life Liquor's debut, most of the wealthy and powerful were vampires. They used their power and influence to make vampirism more and more mainstream and accepted. Then the vampirism moved down into the regular population. No longer constrained, they were as wolves on an island of infinite prey animals. Within 3 years, 30% of the world population was vampiric, and within 10, the majority of the human population were vampires. Humans were increasingly a marginalized minority. Human hunts became a regular pastime. And then humans were an endangered species, protected to make sure that the vampire population would not vanish, as they had no means of repopulating without the humans. And then the world was vampire. And that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun writing this one. I feel like I sometimes do that. I sort of sped it up at the end, but that was always the idea. I just did it a little faster than I thought I would. First of all, I felt like the setup had been done enough, and then the question is, how long do you take to tell this story? And yeah, you could probably make a chapter or two out of this whole, the world slowly becoming vampiric. You could, set up something like that. And maybe I can do something like that down the line. But if you just want to tell the story of how the world goes full vampire, where there's basically essentially zero humans left, that's how you do it, I guess. So I enjoyed doing it. Hope you enjoyed the story. This also is good in terms of timing, because we're at the end of the year here. We're going to be visiting family. Family's going to be visiting us. It's a whole busy time of year. So it'll be nice to be able to start a new story in the new year. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or on Blue Sky. Especially on Blue Sky. I do post to Facebook, but I rarely check it anymore. Its reach is not great unless you pay for it, and that doesn't seem to do very much either. Anyway, thank you for listening. Words and Music copyright 2025, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.